My name's Curtis Boyle. I'm 51 years old, and for 15 years I have counted other people's inventory for a living, mostly in the warehouses around Grand Rapids, Michigan. On my first night at the cold storage plant south of the city, I found a handprint in the frost on the inside of a locked blast freezer door, and that cell had been dead since March. I want to walk you through the 3 nights I spent in that building, because at the end of them, I signed my name to a number I knew was wrong, and I would sign it wrong again tomorrow. First, I should explain what a count is, because it sounds like nothing, and for 15 years it mostly was. Companies that own product don't fully trust the people who warehouse it, so they hire an outside service to walk the racks and count what is physically there. That's me. I show up with a scanner and a tally sheet, and I match the real world to the spreadsheet, rack by rack, pallet by pallet, case by case. It's patient work, and I'm a patient man, and the whole job comes down to agreeing with reality out loud. That August, the agency sent me out alone because the plant had been sold, and the buyer wanted a wall-to-wall physical inventory before the closing. Every rack, every position, every pallet scanned, no estimates, no numbers carried over from the seller's books. 3 nights of it, starting after operations shut down at 10, so my count wouldn't be chasing a moving target. We were deep in a heat wave that summer, the kind where the asphalt stays soft at midnight, and I remember thinking a freezer job in August was as close as my line of work gets to a vacation. The building went up in the 1960s, and looked it. A long, windowless block with a rail spur grown over behind it, and a compressor hum you could feel in your teeth from the parking lot. The night man was named Dale, maintenance, 31 years in that building, and he met me at the man door with a coffee in each hand, and one of them was for me. He walked me through the offices and the dry rooms and down the cooler halls, flipping lights as he went, naming rooms the way you name relatives. At the far end of the last hall, he stopped at a steel door with a pull handle as long as my forearm, and he patted it twice, the way you would pat a horse you respected. Freezer 3, -10 Fahrenheit, blast cells along the back wall, the oldest cold room in the building. He gave me the safety tour, where the switches were, where the axe hung, how the emergency release worked from the inside, and I only half listened because every warehouse gives you that speech. Then he said one more thing, and he said it in a smaller voice than the rest of the tour. The far rack in there, row 41, was legacy product, and the office carried it at 10 pallets, and I would want to leave it at 10. I took that as shorthand for some ancient write-off mess nobody wanted to reopen before a sale, made a note on my clipboard, and forgot about it for 6 hours. Night 1 was clean, honest work, and the scanner and the books agreed with each other room after room like old friends. Dock stock, dry goods, 2 cooler halls of cheese and juice and cider, everything landing within a case or 2 of paper, which is as close as the physical world ever comes. There's a rhythm you drop into on a good count, scan, beep, tick, step, and it eats the hours, and I like the hours eaten. I got to freezer 3 a little after 2 in the morning, zipped into the loaner parka that smelled of somebody else's cigarettes, and hauled the big handle down. Cold like that doesn't feel like temperature at first. It feels like attention, like the room noticing you have arrived. The lights in there were the old sodium kind that take 10 minutes to wake, so the far end of the room stayed a deep orange dusk the whole time I worked. My breath came out as dry snow, the door side shut on its seal behind me, and the fans overhead talked in a low, steady voice, all of it ordinary, all of it the job. Freezer work has its own clock. You count in 20-minute pulls and warm up between them, so one big cold room is really a string of small cold visits. I counted the near racks first, boxed beef and bagged bread dough, and it all matched, and my hands stayed warm enough and my pencil kept up. Row 41 sat against the back wall, past the doors of the 4 blast cells, under the 1 sodium light that never fully woke. The book said 10 pallets of legacy product, shrink-wrapped, no lot numbers, and a product code that appeared nowhere else in the entire building. I counted 11, and I counted the slow way, glove on each corner post, out loud, and it came up 11 twice. The wrap on those pallets was old plastic gone cloudy as a cataract, wound so many turns deep that you couldn't tell what was underneath, only that the shapes were not quite square. The 11th stood in a position my rack map showed as empty, and its wrap was the cloudiest of the lot, and the frost on it was thicker, the way frost grows on whatever has been still the longest. I did what you do with an overage. I flagged it, wrote it on the tally sheet, and raised the scanner for the photograph the buyer wanted of every discrepancy. The photo came out a gray smear, all 4 times, though the same phone took a fine, sharp picture of the aisle 2 feet to the left. I told myself it was the cold on the lens, which was reasonable, and being reasonable was still working for me at that point. Then I walked the blast cells to close out the room, 4 heavy insulated doors, 3 of them humming, 1 of them dark. Blast cell 2 was the dark one, powered down since spring, its compressor cannibalized for parts, a padlock through the hasp and the padlock itself furred with frost. The little viewing pane in that door had frost on the inside face, and pressed into that frost, palm flat, fingers spread, was 1 handprint. A door is just a door, and a print is just a print, until you stand alone under a sodium dusk at half, past 2, doing the arithmetic of which side of the glass it had to be made from. I stood there long enough for my breath to settle, then handed myself the best sentence reason had left. A workman made it during the last defrost, months ago, and the cold kept it like a fossil. That's the thing about my trade. You agree with reality out loud, and when reality misbehaves, you go looking for the version of it you can live with. I finished the room, clocked out at 6 into heat like a wet towel, and drove home with the windows down past lawn sprinklers already running. I slept badly and blamed the heat wave, and that was the last day I got to blame the heat wave. Night 2, Dale met me at the man door with no coffee, and before hello, he asked whether I had counted row 41. I told him the truth, 11 against a book of 10, flagged for reconciliation, photos attempted, and his face did something I hadn't seen it do before. He asked me to sit in the break room with him for 10 minutes before I started, and 31 years of night shift asked with him, so I sat. What he told me over the hum of the vending machine, you can weigh for yourself, because I've had 2 years to weigh it and my scale hasn't settled yet. Row 41 doesn't go in the book, he said, and it hasn't gone in the book properly since before his time. Every counter before me had been steered around it, every cycle count skipped it, and the location was masked in the office system, so it never surfaced on a pick list. If I had to walk that aisle at all, he said, I should keep my eyes on the painted line on the floor and count nothing, not the pallets, not the sprinkler heads, not my own steps. You count it, he said, and it counts back. I asked what that was supposed to mean, and instead of answering, he told me about a man named Merle, who worked freezer nights in that building in 1978. Merle was a shipping checker, a counting man himself, and he was the first to write up the overage in row 41, 1 pallet over book, wrap too cloudy to read. He recounted it the next night and got 1 more, and the night after that, 1 more again, and he stopped talking about anything else in the break room. He started keeping his own ledger, Dale said, a little green memo book with columns ruled by hand, and he would not show anyone what the right-hand column was for. On his last night, the door of Blast Cell 2 was found standing open at dawn with a full cycle run out, and Merle's parka was on its hook by the office, and Merle was not anywhere. No forced door, no alarm, no footprints out through the yard dust, and the company wrote it up as job abandonment, because paperwork has no box for what the night men thought. The green memo book never turned up either, though the company went through his locker twice, and the old hands used to say Merle took the right-hand column with him. And in the morning, Dale said, leaning back with his arms folded, row 41 counted 10. 10 even, agreeing with the book to the unit for the first time in a year, and it stayed 10 for exactly as long as everybody left it alone. I received all of this the way you would expect a man with 15 years of spreadsheets to receive it, which is to say politely. Dale didn't push. He said he had given the same speech to every counter for 3 decades, and most of them smiled the way I was smiling, and every one of them left the row at 10. What he didn't know yet was that this count had a buyer behind it, and the buyer had a man, and the man had my email address. The buyer's representative was named Prout, mid-30s, a fleece vest indoors in August, a voice that used the word variants the way other men use profanity. When my night 1 flag hit the shared folder, he emailed me at 10 to 7 in the morning, 3 lines, no greeting. Full physical means full physical, no masked locations. Recount row 41 tonight, provide unit-level detail and photographic backup. I want to be fair to Prout, because everything he asked for was exactly what I would have asked for in his chair, with his money crossing the table. 15 years, and I had never signed a number I hadn't verified with my own eyes, and I told myself that record, not his email, was the reason I would be going back into that room. That was night 2. And night 2 was when the building stopped pretending along with me. I worked the remaining dry rooms first and saved freezer 3 for the end again, and I would like to call that scheduling, but it was my feet voting. Around midnight, the dock lights flickered once, the length of a blink, and somewhere on the cold side, a door boomed shut that Dale swore up and down he was nowhere near. At 2:30, I hauled down the handle on freezer 3, and the cold came out to meet me like it had been leaning against the door. The handprint on blast cell 2 had company. 4 prints now, spread across the door face and the little viewing pane, no 2 of them the same size, every one of them pressed from the inside of a cell with no power and a padlock. The frost around them had grown out in feathers, the way it does around anything touched and then left alone, and the newest print was still sharp at its edges. I photographed them and got gray smears, and I held my bare palm an inch off the steel and felt cold pouring off a dead room that had no business making its own. That was new information, and I wrote it down, because writing things down is the closest thing I have to praying. Row 41 I was saving for last. 1 pass, fast, camera running, per the plan I had made at my kitchen table in daylight. Daylight plans are a currency that does not spend inside a freezer. I was 2 aisles over, counting cases of juice concentrate, when I heard shrink wrap move. If you've worked around pallets, you know the sound. A slow creak of stretched plastic, the sound a load makes settling on a hot afternoon. Nothing settles at -10. Cold like that holds the world exactly where it is. It came again, longer, from the back wall, from the direction of row 41, plastic easing out and drawing tight again, easing and drawing, in a rhythm I knew from somewhere. I stood with a case of concentrate in my 2 hands and named the rhythm to myself, and the name of it was breathing. Then it stopped, all at once, the way a sound stops when it notices it is being listened to. I finished the concentrate aisle. I want that on whatever record this is, that I finished the aisle, ticks straight, before I walked out of that room. But I did not go to row 41, and my night 2 report said, in the driest sentence I have ever typed, that the legacy row remained open pending final verification. There was one more thing from night 2, and I have never put it in any report until now. My paper tally for the concentrate aisle had a tick I didn't make, 1 extra stroke in the one's column, pencil like mine, in a slant that was not mine. Here's the detail that kept me at my kitchen table until the birds started. When I got home and pulled the scan log to attach it, there was an entry at 3:11 a.m. from freezer 3, row 41, position 11, made with my scanner under my badge number. At 3:11 a.m., I had been standing in the juice aisle listening to plastic breathe. The entry read quantity 1, and the description field, which had come up blank for that product code all week, had a word in it now. The word was more. I didn't sleep that day. I sat in my kitchen with the fans going and did what my trade does when a number will not reconcile, which is walk backward through the paper. For the sale, the seller had emptied 4 decades of the building's records into a data room, and my agency login could see all of it. Receiving logs, cycle counts, incident reports, maintenance orders, the whole sediment of a working warehouse, and I read it like a man looking for his own name in an obituary. Row 41 enters the record in October of 1977. 1 pallet received on a hand-typed manifest from a supplier listed only as initials, no address anywhere on the page. Quantity 1, description, hold for pickup, and no pickup date, and no pickup ever after, not in 40 years of paper. The next cycle count on that location shows 2, and nobody writes a word about the second one. It is simply there, the way a water stain is simply there one spring. 3 by the summer of 1978, which is the year Merle's name stops appearing on the shift sheets, and then the location goes quiet because the counting stops. Somebody in careful 1980s handwriting adds a line to the location master that says "do not cycle" and initials it, and the initials belong to a plant manager 2 owners ago. But it isn't 10 all the way down, either. It's 4 in 1981, 6 in 1986, 9 in 1992, 1 quiet, unremarked pallet at a time. Every jump sits within a month of somebody being sent in to look, an insurance audit, a fire inspection, a bank appraisal, and after each visit the number is bigger and the file goes quiet again. There is 1 incident report in the stack, from 1991, a refrigeration tech who wrote that he heard tallying from an empty aisle, numbers read out low and steady, and asked for days. The book says 10 because 10 is where the last set of eyes finally stopped counting, and that was a long time before me. I called Dale at home that afternoon, which I had no business doing, and asked him the question I had been circling since 3 a.m., which is what is under the wrap. He went quiet long enough that I checked whether the call had dropped. Then he said that in 31 years, he had never cut one open, and neither had anybody else, and that I should think hard about why a building full of bored, curious night workers never once looked. Some counts, he said. You don't want the units. Prout was standing on the dock when I pulled in for the last night, vest and all, with the day's heat still rolling off the lot behind him like surf. The closing was set for Friday morning. My certified count was due at 6 a.m., every location physical, no carried numbers, or the price got renegotiated off the seller's books. I told him about the overage, and about the 311 scan I had not made, and because I was too tired to ration honesty, a plain version of what Dale had told me. He listened the way you listen to an employee you are deciding whether to replace, nodding in the wrong places, and then he said the sentence I still think about. If a location counts different every time you look, he said, that is exactly why it gets counted. Because one of those numbers is an asset and the rest of them are somebody's problem. He wasn't wrong. That is the miserable thing about Prout. He was never once wrong, and it never mattered at all. Dale worked that night too, his last before the handover, and he stopped me at the man door with no coffee and no tour left to give. He said, if it goes bad in there, don't you run for the door counting your steps, and I laughed, and he looked at me until I stopped laughing. I counted the whole rest of the building first, every remaining room, and I made those rooms last as long as rooms can last, and I knew exactly what I was doing. At 4 minutes past 3 in the morning, out of building and out of excuses, I hauled down the handle of freezer 3 for the last time. I propped the door wide with the hardwood wedge counters carry for cold rooms, kicked it in tight, and told myself that settled the matter of the door. The room had changed the way a face changes when it stops pretending to be asleep. Every blast cell door on the back wall wore handprints now, pressed thin into the frost from the inside, crowded around the viewing panes the way faces crowd a window to watch a parade. The sodium light over row 41, the one that never woke, was awake, and it lit that aisle a shade of orange I have no name for, orange with something going wrong at the edges of it. The pallets stood in their row under their cloudy wrap, and the wrap was moving, barely, all down the row together, easing out and drawing tight, easing and drawing, with no sound at all this time. I raised the scanner, and you should know there was a version of that moment where I turned and walked out, and I have visited that version 1,000 times since, and I don't get to live in it. Position 1, scan beep. Position 2, scan beep. I heard my own voice counting along out loud, which is how they train you to keep a count honest, and my voice sounded like it was coming from the far end of the aisle instead of from my chest. I said 10 at the 10th pallet, and 11 at the 11th, and then I was standing in front of a 12th, square in a position that had been bare rack on Monday night. The wrap on the 12th was clear. Not clouded, clear, new, wound loose and low, as if it had been done in a hurry or done recently or not quite finished being done. I did not look long at what the clear wrap held. I can tell you the shape was long, and that it was the only pallet in that building I never once saw hold perfectly still. Behind me, with no draft and no hand on it, the main door of freezer 3 spat its wedge out across the floor and swung to and seated itself against the gasket with a sound like a jar sealing. The sodium lights let go in patches, dimming backward down the room, and the blast fans in the dead cells, the cells with no power in them, wound up together into a full roar. The temperature dropped so fast the parka crackled when I moved, and the air went past cold into something the body does not file as weather anymore. It files it as pressure. I ran. I will say that plainly. I ran for where the door was, and my headlamp lit rack after rack that was not on the map I had carried in my head for 3 nights. The room was bigger than the building. I walked 11 aisles in a room that holds 8, and I am a man who measures for a living. My phone died the way phones die in deep cold, most of a battery gone to black in the time it took to drag my glove off with my teeth. I found the main door at last by keeping my glove on the wall and following it, and I drove my fist into the emergency release plunger, and the plunger went all the way in and touched nothing. And down the aisles behind me, unhurried, came the long, slow creak of stretched plastic, easing and easing again, a little closer each time it eased. Then the emergency intercom crackled on the wall beside the door, which it should not have been able to do, because its line was cut in 2009 and its handset hung off a bare bracket. Dale had shown it to me on the first tour, dead wires taped back, a work order sticker older than his truck, and here was its speaker warming up with a sound like breath drawn through cloth. The voice, when it came, was an old man's voice, level and unhurried, the voice of somebody long used to reading numbers out to a room. It did not say hello, and it did not say my name, and I have thought since that names might be a thing it was careful with. It said, "Stop counting," and I understood that I still was, under my breath, steps and aisles and the beats of my own blood, the way you would grip a railing in the dark. I stopped, and stopping was harder than any recount I have ever run, because counting is what I am, and that room knew it the way water knows the low place in a floor. The voice said, eyes closed now. It said, Hand on the rack rail and walk, and do not count the steps, no matter how many of them there are. It said, whatever touches you is not a number, and nothing in this room is a number tonight, and you will keep walking until you feel the chain that hangs on the handle. So I shut my eyes inside a dark freezer. In a cold I could hear moving, on the word of a wire that went nowhere, because it was the only voice in that building asking me to leave. I walked, and the rail was where the voice said it would be, and I did not count. Plastic moved beside my face, near enough that the creak of it arrived on my cheek as a change in the air, and I did not count how near, and I did not count how many times. Something took the hem of my parka, low down, gentle as a current taking a sleeve, and walked with me a little while and let go. Somewhere in the middle of it, the voice said, "Good," quietly, one time, the way you would settle a horse, and I held onto that word like a rail of its own. The voice stayed level the whole way out, a man reading a room to sleep, and in all of it, it never once said a number. When my glove found the chain on the handle, the fans died altogether, mid-roar, the way an organ note ends when the hands come off the keys. The door gave, the seal peeled back with a long sigh, and I stepped out into the cooler hall, into ordinary orange light and air that felt like an oven and read 40 degrees. By the door log, I had been inside freezer 3 for 11 minutes. My watch, the wind-up my father left me, had lost 2 hours, and it loses them again every August now, a minute at a time across the month, and no watchmaker I have paid can find a reason. Dale found me sitting on a cider pallet in the cooler hall with my hood down, and he looked at me for a long moment, and he did not ask me one single thing. He walked me to the intercom box by the freezer door and opened its little metal cover with a key off his ring, and we stood there and looked together. There was nothing inside. No speaker, no wiring, a clean, empty box with paint shadows where the guts had been bolted, once, a long time ago. I asked whose voice that had been, and Dale, whom I never once caught lying, said the checkers used to read the close-of-shift counts over that intercom, so the office could tally along. He said Merle had a fine reading voice on him, and that is all either of us has ever said about it. Now comes the part I am not proud of, which is the number. My certified physical, signed, stamped, and archived in the data room over my license number shows row 41 at 10 pallets, agreeing with the book to the unit. Prout got his full physical with no masked locations, because on the last morning I walked that aisle in daylight, counted out loud to 10, and then I stopped saying numbers. Whatever stood 11th and 12th in that row on the worst night of my life, I left off the books, the way every set of eyes before me learned to leave it, and the sale closed Friday on schedule. 15 years, one falsified line, and I would write it again tomorrow with a steadier hand, and you can make of that whatever you need to make of it. The new owners run the building leaner, I hear, fewer night hands, more cameras, and Freezer 3 sits on their capital plan as decommissioned, pending demolition. It has been pending for 2 years now, the way a held breath is pending. Dale retired that fall, and we have breakfast some months at a diner halfway between us, and we talk about fishing and his granddaughter and never about the building, by an agreement nobody spoke. As for me, I still count for a living, and I am still good at it, but I work days only now, and my clients have learned not to ask why. The job left a habit in me, and I will tell you the habit, and then I will let you go. At night, I don't count anything, not stairs, not headlights on the ceiling, not the knocks of a cooling stove, because I learned that a count is a door, and a door does not care which way it opens. If I surface at 3 in the morning and catch my mind ticking off my own heartbeats, I get up, turn the kitchen light on, and read the newspaper out loud slowly until the ticking stops. Because 12 was never the end of that row. 12 was only as far as I got. And in a cold room south of Grand Rapids, in the orange dark, Something patient as paper is standing very still, waiting for the next set of eyes, waiting to be counted.